So this is 2.5, multiply variables with integers. What I first would like you to do is in your notes, I want you to write down the steps. So pause the video and go ahead, write down those steps, 1 through 5. What I'm going to do is go through the steps. So the very first one is to expand powers. So if there are any exponents or any powers like that, you want to make sure that you go through those. The second thing is to count your negatives. That's going to tell us whether or not our answer is going to be positive or negative based on if there's an even amount of negatives or if there's an odd amount of negatives. The third step is to multiply any constants and coefficients. So those are just any numbers in the problem you're going to multiply together. Fourth step is to multiply our variables, and I'll show you how to do that when we get into our I do problem. And then our very last step is just to simplify, and that just means, cleaning up our work. So our very first problem that we're going to do is negative 2x times 3x times negative 4. So our very first step is to expand any powers. And if you notice, the power of this x is just 1, and the power of this x is 1 also. So expand powers, we actually don't need to do that for this example because there's no other powers besides 1. So we can just skip the very first step. The second step says that we need to count negatives. So I see that I have a negative here, that's 1, and I have a negative here, so that's 2. Since there's 2 negatives and we're multiplying, that means that it's going to be a positive answer. So I'm going to put a plus sign. All right. Step 3 says to multiply any constants and coefficients. So a number in front of a variable, like this 2 right now, that's a coefficient. The number in front of this variable x, that's a 3, that's a coefficient. This number doesn't have a variable, so this is what we call a constant. So what we're going to do is we're going to multiply our 2, 3, and 4 together. So 2 times 3 is 6, 6 times 4 is 24, so I'm going to write 24. All right, now what we're going to do is multiply any variable. So I have a variable here, x, and I have a variable here, x, and these are being multiplied. So I would write that as 24x times x, or just 24x. Step 5 says that we need to simplify, which just means we need to clean it up. And when I look at this answer, I see that I have 24, so that's good, and I see I have a plus sign, but I see that I have xx. Now x times x can be rewritten with powers. So we really could say 24x squared. Because if you remember powers, this just means that this variable, or this could be a number, when it's squared, it just means that it's being multiplied by itself twice, which is exactly what we had here. We had x times x, so we're just going to rewrite it as x squared. Let's do another example. So let's do negative 2x squared times 5x to the third power times negative x squared. And if you notice that squared that I just did, it's on the outside of the parentheses. So let's go through our steps, and our very first step says to expand powers. So I do see a lot of exponents. I see a power here, I see a power here, and I see one here. So I'm going to need to expand this. So since the power is on the inside of the parentheses, from chapter 1 we know that this 2 only goes with the x, doesn't go with the negative 2. So when I rewrite this, I'm going to expand it as negative 2x times x, because that 2 inside the parentheses only goes with the x. It doesn't go with the negative 2, it only goes with the x. So let's expand our next one, which is 5x to the third power, and that, once again, that 3 is inside the parentheses, so it just goes with that x. So that would be 5 times x times x times x. So there's 3 x's. Now, this last one, this 2's on the outside of the parentheses, which just means that everything inside the parentheses, so both the negative and the x, are going to get multiplied by itself twice. So that would be negative x times negative x. So now we've expanded. So our very next step, step 2, is that we're going to count the negatives. Well, when I look, I've got a negative here, I have a negative here, and I have a negative here. So that's 3 negatives. 1, 2, 3 negatives. So since there's an odd amount of negatives, that means my answer is going to remain negative. So I'm going to put a negative sign. Now, step 3 says that I can multiply any constants and any coefficients. So if I'm looking, I see that I have a 2, a 5, and then these coefficients are just 1 and a 1. So 2 times 5 times 1 times 1, that would be 10. Okay, so then my very next step is to multiply my variable. So I'm just going to rewrite this. I'm going to say that there's 2 x's here, so x times x, and there's 3 here, x times x times x, that's 3, and then a 4th x, and then a 5th x. So now I have negative 10 x times x times x times x times x times x times x. So my last step, of course, is to simplify and to clean this mess up right here. So x times x times x times x times x times x times x, we need to write that with a power. So I'm going to keep the negative 10, but then I'm going to say that it's times x to the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 power. So my answer is negative 10 x to the 7th power. Let's do a we do together. So our very first we do problem is going to be negative x to the 3rd power times 2x squared times negative 2x to the 2nd power. So go ahead, write that. And now what we're going to do is go through our steps. So our very first step is to expand, and I see that I have powers. I have a 3, a 2, and a 2. So this very first one, that 3 is in the inside of the parentheses, so it's only with the x. So I'm going to put a negative in front, but since that 3 is only with the x, I'm only going to just put one negative. And then I'm going to say x times x times x. 3 of those x's are being multiplied by each other. And then I have 2x, and you see how this 2 is on the outside of the parentheses? That means that this whole thing inside the parentheses needs to be multiplied by itself twice. So 2x times 2x. Very good. And now I have a negative 2x. Same thing with a 2 outside of the parentheses. So once again, we're going to do negative 2x times negative 2x. All right, now we can go to step 2 where it's just counting negatives. So I've got 1, 2, 3 negatives. So since I have 3 negatives, go ahead and think about to yourself what that would be. That answer is going to be negative because there's 3 of them. There's an odd amount, it's going to be negative. Now what I can do is multiply, step 3, multiply constants and coefficients. So I'm going to multiply 2 times 2 times 2 times 2. So 2 times 2 is 4, times 2 is 8, times 2 is 16. So I know I have 16. Now I'm going to multiply my variables. So I have 3 here, 3 x's, so 3, so 1, 2, 3 being multiplied. And I have another one here, and one here, and one here, and my last one. So I need to clean this up. Step 5 is to clean up any variables with powers. So I can leave the negative 16, but then I need to say that it's being multiplied by x to the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7th power. So negative 16x to the 7th power is my answer. Let's do another one together. This time I'm going to take away the steps and see if you can work with me without having them on the screen. So the example that I have for you is 2a squared times negative x squared times negative 3a. All right. So this one is a little different because there's 2 different variables, but I'll show you how to work with that. It's not too big of a deal. So first, our very first step is to expand. And I do have some powers, so I'm going to need to expand this 2. This 2 is on the outside of the parentheses, so that means that the everything inside the parentheses needs to be multiplied by itself twice. So when we expand, which is the first step, we're going to say 2a times 2a, and now I'm going to expand this 2, and it's on the inside of the parentheses, so that 2 only goes with the x. So I'm going to rewrite that as negative x times x. Remember that 2 doesn't go with the negative sign, it only goes with the x. And then I don't need to expand this last one, I'm just going to rewrite it as negative 3a. Okay, now my very next step is to count the negatives. So when I count them, I have 1 here and then 1 here. So a negative times a negative is a positive. There's 2, it's an even amount, positive. And then I'm going to multiply any coefficients and constants I have. So I have 2 times 2 times 3. So 2 times 2 is 4. 4 times 3 is 12. Now I'm going to multiply any variables I have. So I have an a, 2 x's, and then an a. So my very last step says I need to clean this up. I need to rewrite this in ways where there's powers involved. So I'm first going to just leave the 12. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to write the a's using power. So that's a to the 1, 2, 3, so third power, or a cubed. And then I'm going to write my x's. So there's 2 x's, so that's x squared. So my answer is positive 12a cubed x squared. Great, now it's time for you-dos. So go ahead and write these problems that I put up and then solve them on your own. And then what you're going to do is take a picture or notability of all your notes and your you-do problems, and you're going to submit them into Schoology in place of your quiz. So the examples that I want you to do, the first problem, you're going to do negative x squared times 2x. And then the second problem is going to be 3x squared times 2x times negative x squared. And then our very last problem that what we want you to do, you're going to do 2a times negative 3x squared times negative a. So here are your 3 problems. Go ahead and solve those. Make sure that you're using your steps and you're going step by step, and don't forget step 5 is to simplify, so rewrite those with those exponents.